الجميع. أهلا وسهلا بكم اليوم. شكرا لتواجدكم بيننا حضورا ومشاركين. اسمحوا لي أن نبدأ أعمال هذا المؤتمر اليوم مع الكلمة الترحيبية لرئيس الجامعة دكتور عبد اللطيف أبو حجلة، فليتفضل.
صباح الخير جميعا. Good morning ladies and gentlemen. الأساتذة والباحثون الأكاديميون، الحضور الكريم، أسعد الله صباحكم بكل الخير، وأهلا وسهلا بكم في رحاب جامعة بيرزيت. منذ سنوات عدة تشهد منطقة الشرق الأوسط تغيرات دراماتيكية واستراتيجية. ابتدأت بالثورات العربية التي أطلق عليها اسم الربيع العربي، والتي كان من نتائجها تغيير عدد من أنظمة الحكم في عدد من الدول العربية. ورغم التفاؤل الذي كان يحوم حول تلك التغيرات السريعة في المنطقة، إلا أن هذه الثورات لم تؤدي إلى تغييرات جذرية في الأنظمة العربية، حيث ما زالت معظم هذه الدول تشهد حالة من عدم الاستقرار واستمرار الصراع على السلطة الذي يتخذ شكل الحرب الأهلية، والتي لم تعد مقتصرة على لاعبين محليين، وإنما اتسعت لتشمل قوات ومصالح إقليمية ودولية مهدت الطريق لجعل الدول العربية مسرحاً لصراعات إقليمية ودولية ولمواجهة غير مباشرة، وهو ما صعب من إمكانية تسميتها بالحروب الأهلية، وبالتالي يطلق عليها اسم حروب بالوكالات. إن هذه الأحداث الدائرة في دول المنطقة من الثورات والتدخلات الدولية تجعل من الصعب الجزم بمآلات هذه التغيرات وتأثيرها على المنطقة. وفي ظل كافة هذه التغيرات تشهد المنطقة صراعاً على قيادتها، الأمر الذي غير المحصور فقط في الدول العربية، وإنما في دول إقليمية مجاورة. فتركيا وإيران مثلاً تحاولان أن تلعبا دوراً قيادياً في المنطقة، ويظهر ذلك بشكل واضح من خلال تدخلاتهما في الصراع في سوريا واليمن وفي الصراع الفلسطيني الإسرائيلي. وفيما ينعقد مؤتمركم المهم هذا، ينتظر طلبة الجامعة ظهيرة هذا اليوم لتبدأ المناظرة السنوية بين ممثلي الكتل الطلابية المتنافسة على مقاعد مؤتمر مجلس طلبة الجامعة، وهو تقليد سنوي تفتخر به جامعة بيرزيت وتحرص على الحفاظ عليه وحمايته، إعلاء لقيم الحرية والليبرالية التي تنتهجها الجامعة بكل مكوناتها، ممارسة دائمة لا تسمح بخرقها أو الاعتداء عليها. وبالتزامن مع اليوم الثاني لهذا المؤتمر، أي يوم غد، سيمارس الطلبة حقهم الديمقراطي في اختيار ممثليهم في مجلس الطلبة للعام الأكاديمي المقبل، ولعل النتائج تظهر بعد اختتام أعمال مؤتمركم بقليل. لتفوز الديمقراطية بغض النظر عن الأسماء، هذه الديمقراطية التي غابت كثيراً في المحيط العربي وحتى في حالتنا الفلسطينية لغير سبب، ولعل هذا المؤتمر يقف على قراءة أوضاع الإقليم والقوى الدولية الفاعلة وأثرها على فلسطين، التي تبدو بشكل أو بآخر مؤثراً ومتأثراً بكل الحراك السياسي في العالم. وننتظر سماع مداخلات مهمة ونقاشات حيوية في مؤتمر فلسطين في إقليم متغير. الضيوف الكرام، إن كل ما سبق يظهر أن المنطقة تشهد تغيرات وتحولات مستمرة وسريعة، ولذا من الصعب الإشارة إلى نظام إقليمي في الشرق الأوسط، بل قد يصبح مصطلح اضطراب إقليمي أكثر ملائمة وبالتالي وفي ظل كل ذلك تصبح خيارات فلسطين الحالية على الصعيد الإقليمي صعبة للغاية. ومن هنا يكون السؤال الأهم في هذه الحالة: ما هي الآثار المترتبة على الاضطرابات في المنطقة على القضية الفلسطينية؟ وما هي الفرص والإمكانات المطروحة في ظل التغيرات والتحولات التي تعصف بالمنطقة العربية؟ أشكر الزملاء في معهد إبراهيم أبو لغد على الجهود المثمرة لعقد هذا المؤتمر المهم، وأهنئهم على قدرتهم على جمع كوكب من الباحثين المرموقين الذين نأمل أن تشكل أوراقهم إضافات نوعية تسهم في تحقيق الهدف من عقد هذا المؤتمر. أصدق الأمنيات بنجاح مؤتمركم، وأكرر ترحيبي بكم في جامعة بيرزيت، والسلام عليكم.
شكرا دكتور عبد اللطيف. فليتفضل الآن السيد مارك فرينكس، مدير عام مؤسسة كونراد أديناور، شريكنا الاستراتيجي وممول هذا المؤتمر.
Thank you, Suhaila. Your Excellencies, Honorable Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of the Abelard Institute and the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. Welcome on behalf of CAS, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, a German political foundation that contributes to political, economic, and social change through dialogue programs between Brussels, Germany, and Palestine, and through projects on the ground. And we are very much honored to be a partner of the Abelard Institute here. And it's a great pleasure to co-host this international conference again. It is after last year's event on Palestine in a Changing World, the second conference in the frame of our partnership. And in Germany, we speak of a tradition once something happens for the second time. So although we as CAS want to contribute to change, and we want to be creative and to foster an out-of-the-box thinking, I really like the conservative idea of a tradition and look forward to many more forms of cooperation between the Konrad Adenauer Foundation and the Abelard Institute. It has been an active path that we have embarked on in the past months and years. Just recently, the scientific staff of the Abelard Institute presented the public its thoughts on the strategic outlook of this esteemed institution. Next year, we will commemorate the 100th birthday of Ibrahim Abelard. And I think both events together reflect the tradition and intellectual creativity meet at Birzeit University until today. Palestine in a changing region. After last year's macro flight through global and international relations, we are zooming today and tomorrow into the regional context. And it reminds me of an essay that Volker Perthes, director of the leading German think tank SWP, has published. The title was The End of the Middle East as We Used to Know It. He published this book in 2015, and one might think if something comes to an end, something new must replace it. And I think the people and peoples in the region here are still waiting for this new chapter. While Perthes mainly focuses on the big strategic and geostrategic confrontations, he reserves only a few pages on Israel and Palestine. This alone already says a lot about the changing context and its consequences for what was once called the mother of all conflicts, the one between Israel and Palestine. While in the past, events in Palestine provoked regional and Western leaders to react, it is the Palestinian people today that directly feels the repercussions of regional shifts, changes, and conflicts. But is it solely the region that undergoes a change? Let me share some recent personal episodes with you. Some weeks ago, I have met a hero of the first Intifada in East Jerusalem. This person was complaining that 25 years after Oslo, the Palestinian Authority completely gave up on Jerusalem. The holy city no longer has a political role to play in present Palestine, the person was telling me, pointing to Ramallah, where the leadership is placed now. Apparently, a change to the negative. A second episode. Last month, I've Skyped, only Skype because we couldn't go there, with two of the organizers who are behind the ongoing protests in Gaza. One, by the way, is a CAS alumnus. which shows that we as a foundation are always with those demanding justice. The two gentlemen were telling me that the Palestinian national strategy goes now back to civil resistance and that they are aiming for a global coalition until Nakba Day next week. Apparently, a change to the positive. And finally, the Palestinian National Council has met in a formal session for the first time after more than 2 decades. Maybe a change towards reconciliation, or rather not. Change is not only happening to Palestine. Palestinians can be the driving force for the much needed, much desired change. I'm hence very curious to learn more about from our esteemed speakers and commentators where Palestine and the Palestinians can play an active role vis-à-vis changes that are now unfolding in the region, worldwide, and on a domestic context. Ladies and gentlemen, I of course don't leave the stage without thanking the great team of the Abu Lord Institute for organizing this event. Lord Habash and Suhaila Abdelatif did a terrific job in bringing all these experts to Palestine and to this university. Thanks to all researchers and experts from the field who have accepted our invitation and who will share their insights with us throughout the conference today and tomorrow. I wish us all enriching sessions. Thank you for being and staying with us.
شكرا للسيد مارك. الآن مع كلمة الدكتورة لورد حبش مديرة معهد إبراهيم أبو الغد للدراسات الدولية.
أسعدكم صباحا السادة الأفاضل، حضرة الدكتور عبد اللطيف أبو حجلة، حضرة الدكتور مارك فرانك مدير عام مؤسسة كونراد أديناور، السادة الباحثين والمشاركين الأفاضل، حضرات الضيوف وزملاء الأعزاء، الحضور الكريم، كل في موقعه مع حفظ الألقاب لكم جميعا. تحية فلسطينية وبعد. من قلب جامعة بيرزيت اسمحوا لي بداية أن أرحب بكم جميعا في افتتاح أعمال مؤتمرنا الدولي السنوي فلسطين في اقليم متغير، والذي يأتي انعقاده في خضم أجواء الديمقراطية والتنافس بين الكتل الطلابية المختلفة لتشكيل مجلس الطلبة. لقد عززت الجامعة والطلبة بمشاركتهم وتنافسهم الحر من قيم الديمقراطية والنزاهة والشفافية، فأصبحت الممارسة الديمقراطية والانتخابات إرث يحتفي ويدافع عنه الجميع. كما يصادف اليوم مرور 20 عاماً على تأسيس معهد إبراهيم أبو الغد من قبل 4 أساتذة عملوا على استحداث برنامج الماجستير في الدراسات الدولية. وقد تم استحداث البرنامج من قبل الراحل الدكتور إبراهيم أبو الغد والدكتور روجر هيكوك والدكتور علي الجرباوي والدكتور زياد أبو عمرو. وقد أكمل المعهد مسيرته على مدار عقدين، حيث تخرج أكثر من 500 من الطلبة الذين تبوأوا العديد من المناصب في المجتمع، نذكر منهم المناضل والقائد والأسير دكتور مروان البرغوثي. لقد أصبحت نشاطات المعهد فضاء رحبا ومنارة للحوار البناء وتبادل الآراء بين الأكاديميين بخصوص أهم الإشكالات والقضايا العربية والإقليمية والعالمية الراهنة. لقد تبنى المعهد منذ إنشائه سياسة ثابتة تمتاز بالحيادية في طرح القضايا الكبرى والملحة التي تواجهنا كفلسطينيين، وعملا بهذه السياسة، ولأن المعهد معني إلى أبعد الحدود بقضايا بلدنا ومستقبله، فكان موضوع الإقليم المتغير عنوانا لمؤتمرنا اليوم، نظرا إلى خطورة الأحداث التي تشهدها المنطقة في الوقت الحالي. فالكل يتحدث عن صفقة القرن، وعن التخوفات من الهيمنة الأمريكية، وعن التحالفات والتجاذبات، وعن الحرب في سوريا وغيرها من القضايا الإقليمية الشائكة. فبالرغم من أن الثورات الشعبية قد نجحت في إسقاط عدد من الأنظمة المتجذرة في السلطة، إلى أنها لم تنجح في إقامة سلطات بديلة ديمقراطية، ويبدو أن هذا المخاض الذي تولد عن الحراك العربي مرشح للاستمرار لسنوات عديدة في ظل عملية الاستقطاب والتجاذب السياسي المستمر بين مختلف القوى السياسية الجديدة والقديمة. وعليه لا بد من طرح السؤال حول ارتدادات هذه التطورات الإقليمية على القضية الفلسطينية، خصوصاً في ظل استمرار حالة التشظي التي تشهدها سوريا ولبنان واليمن والعراق. فما تشهده الدول العربية من تحولات سياسية واجتماعية واقتصادية ستؤدي إلى هيكلة جديدة للدول والمجتمعات، كما يمكن أن تؤدي إلى اختلالات كبيرة في موازين القوى على المستويين الإقليمي والدولي، بحيث يكون لذلك تداعيات وارتدادات دراماتيكية على الأمن والاستقرار الوطني والإقليمي. وهذه التحولات التي تشهدها المنطقة مرشحة للتفاعل والاستمرار لعقود مقبلة، الأمر الذي جعل منها ميداناً خصباً للدراسات الأكاديمية التي تحاول تمحيص هذه الديناميات الجديدة التي دخلتها. ولذا استقطب مؤتمرنا كعادته في السنوات السابقة نخبة من الباحثين والمثقفين والخبراء وصناع القرار والإعلاميين من مختلف الدول الأجنبية والعربية ومن فلسطين أيضاً، ليتولوا على امتداد جلسته رصد التغييرات في البيئة الإقليمية كل حسب تخصصه. وعليه فإن محاور هذا المؤتمر تتضمن العلاقات العربية والعلاقات العربية بالقوى العظمى ومحاولات الهيمنة على الإقليم ودور المحور الإيراني والمحور التركي، بالإضافة إلى تغيرات في العلاقات القوى العظمى ببعضها البعض وتأثيرها على المنطقة العربية. وتبدو الحاجة ملحة أن نختتم جلسات هذا المؤتمر بجلسة فلسطينية نتناول فيها انعكاسات كل التغيرات التي تم نقاشها على مدار يومين، وتحديد التحديات التي تواجهنا، وبحث الخيارات الممكنة من أجل مواجهة مختلف التهديدات والمخاطر الراهنة والإمكانيات المستقبلية. يسعدني أن أختتم حديثي هذا بالشكر الخاص للجنة المؤتمر ممثلة بالدكتور علي الجرباوي والدكتور غسان الخطيب، الذين لم يتوانوا عن تقديم الدعم الكامل في التحضيرات لهذا المؤتمر. كما أتوجه بالشكر الخاص أيضاً إلى منسقة المؤتمر سهيلة عبد اللطيف على ما بذلته من جهد، وإلى طاقم المعهد. والشكر موصول أيضاً للمتحدثين الذين لبوا دعوتنا للمشاركة في أعمال هذا المؤتمر. كما أنني أثمن وأقدر جداً الشراكة الدائمة بين معهد إبراهيم أبو لغد ومؤسسة كونراد أدينور الداعمة لهذا المؤتمر، تحديداً دعم الأستاذ مارك فرينكس مدير المؤسسة والآنسة عبير زغاري مديرة البرنامج. أرحب بكم مرة أخرى وأشكركم على تلبية دعوتنا والمساهمة معنا في إنجاح فعاليات هذا المؤتمر ومخرجاته، متمنياً لضيوفنا الكرام طيب الإقامة والتوفيق، وشكراً لكم. بس حنشوف بس أبو 3 دقايق فيلم عن معهد. ننتقل الآن للجلسة الأولى.
ليتفضل كل من دكتورة غادة المدبوح، دكتور تيموثي ميتشل، دكتور ليونيد إيزايف، ودكتور ديمتري بوريس.
I'd like to thank all those who worked for this conference and the administration and the students for coming this morning. I will start our first session with the Professor Timothy Mitchell about changes in U.S. foreign policy towards the Middle East. And then we'll proceed, and I will have some remarks at the end of the session, I guess. So let's start.
Thank you to President Dr. Abdel Latif Abu Hijla, to the organizers of the conference, to Habash, Sohaila, Abdel Latif, to Mark Fringe and the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung for the support of this event. I'm delighted to be here. I'm very honored to have this opportunity. I've been invited to speak about America. I'm not American. And specifically about changes in US foreign policy towards the Middle East in the light of the Trump administration. Thank you. I have some bad news for you about the US and about the Middle East in the age of Trump. And what's worse, the bad news is not Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump is just a symbol of the bad news. But let me start with some good news. America's power in the Arab world, I'm going to argue, is at its weakest point in decades. In fact, I would like to describe this year, 2018, as the start of a new stage of weakness in the US. This may sound like a shocking thing to say. America is moving its embassy to Jerusalem. Its ambassador, David Friedman, Mr. Trump's former bankruptcy lawyer, is a fervent supporter of the settler movement. America is at war in 6 countries in the region, and in each case, it either started the war or found ways to prolong it. Trump is threatening to destroy the international nuclear agreement on Iran and to reimpose sanctions on that country. How is any of this a sign of weakness? I think the answer depends on how we think about political power and the power of an imperial state like the US. But unfortunately, in order to understand this, I'm going to have to start by taking a long view. Before talking a little more at the end about the situation today, I want to briefly go back 100 years to the year 1918. And in fact, to divide history, to make it simple, into just 3 50-year periods. The first one from 1918 to the significant year of 1968. The second one from 1968 until today. And the third period from today until the year 2068. American power in the region, I'm going to argue, was strongest in the first 50 years, was weaker in the second 50, and looking forward from today will be even weaker still in the third 50. In 1918, as you know, Britain occupied Palestine. The war of occupation was not easy at first, and the British Army suffered a couple of big defeats at the hands of the Ottoman forces. But then they acquired a new weapon, just invented, airplanes. The Ottoman Arab armies defending Palestine didn't have airplanes. The British used the planes to bomb and machine gun their opponents in a one-sided slaughter, not unlike what's happening in certain parts of Palestine still today. Having destroyed Ottoman power, Britain hoped that the United States would take over from it the difficult role of ruling Palestine. And Britain wanted the US to accept from the League of Nations the mandate for the occupation and rule of Palestine. Washington refused to join the League of Nations or to take on the mandate, and so Britain decided in 1921 that the next best option would be to go back to a crazy idea that Lord Balfour had suggested 4 years before, to make up for Britain's own weaknesses by supporting a failing program to colonize Palestine with the help of European Jewish settlers. The first 50 years after 1918 were a period of increasing British, and then as Britain weakened, of American power. In Palestine, of course, the Zionist movement, first with British and then American support, successfully colonized and settled the country, and in 1948 expelled most of its people, seizing control of 75%. 8 years later, in 1956, Israel hoped to finish and take the rest, but it didn't succeed in that until 1967. Beyond Palestine, in this first 50-year period, up to 1968, British and American power was equally successful. British and American oil companies took direct control of the region's major resource, its vast reserves of petroleum. It used this control largely to prevent or slow down the development of Arab oil production, which would have threatened the center of world oil production in Texas and the southern United States. Whenever nationalist governments came to power in the region and threatened this control, as in Iran in 1951 or Iraq in 1958, America removed them with relatively simple military coups. As Britain weakened and lost its power, America maintained this control in its place, and it did so without a single military base in the region, without fighting any local wars, or losing a single soldier in battle. In 1968, things began to change, starting the second 50-year period that I want to outline. In Palestine, the rise of a resistance movement and a program of steadfastness gave people a way to prevent further mass expulsion and to remain on the land. In Egypt, the military regime survives Israel's second attempt within a decade to bring it down. In Syria and Iraq, Assad and Saddam came to power and developed states whose security systems were so strong that the US could never again engineer a coup d'etat in the region. Sorry. It's the trouble with reading from a screen. We'll get there. Equally important, across the region, over the following decade, the United States and Britain lost control of the oil industries, which, one by one, the governments of the region nationalized. The US found itself in a much weaker position across the region, a weakness that, if one took a broader view, of course, coincided in that same year in 1968 with its first major military defeat in Vietnam and the end of its larger defeat in Southeast Asia. By the end of that first decade of this second period, in 1978-79, the US suffered an even bigger setback, the overthrow of the Shah in Iran. It tried to prevent the Iranian Revolution by organizing a military coup, and it failed. In this period, America had two main responses to this weakness. First, it began to form much closer alliances with reactionary powers of the far right. On the one hand, with Zionism, on the other, with forms of conservative Islam in Saudi Arabia, which helped support, for example, through the organizing and funding of the which it helped to support through, for example, the organizing and funding of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the 1970s and 1980s. Secondly, no longer able to remove governments it didn't like by military coup, as it could in the first period, it developed an alternative strategy to deal with those who opposed US hegemony in the region, turning regional conflicts, which it couldn't win, into long, debilitating wars. In Palestine, it blocked attempts to make Israel give up the territory it had seized in 1967, and later, of course, sanctioned Israel's invasion and 18-year occupation of Lebanon. In the oil regions, the US prevented an end to the Iran-Iraq war to weaken both sides. It exacerbated the conflict in Afghanistan, and it imposed long-term sanctions on Iran and on Iraq after Saddam's invasion of Kuwait. These conflicts were not a symptom of American power, but rather of its relative weakness compared to before. Compared to the 50 years before 68, its influence was waning, and it could manage only to weaken its rivals through festering conflicts and through sanctions. Of course, the 9/11 attacks seemed to give the US an opportunity to reverse this weakness and to stem this sequence of setbacks by launching wars, the invasion of Afghanistan first and then of Iraq, and more recently it helped to create the civil war in Syria and to exacerbate another in Yemen. These conflicts have led to hundreds of thousands dead, millions of refugees, and to further defeats for the United States. You're all familiar with this history of the last 50 years. I'm repeating it because I want to see it in this slightly different way, to make better sense of the present. We usually think of recent decades as an era of American domination. I want to see it as an era of American decline compared to the 50 years that went before, a decline that was masked by the fact that Washington coped with its weakness by forming a series of contradictory alliances with an increasingly right-wing form of Zionism in Palestine, with Salafism through Saudi Arabia, with a military regime in Egypt, with jihadism in Afghanistan, with the Christian far right in Lebanon, with Shia sectarianism in Iraq, and so on. And if there were time, one could also discuss how at home in the United States, with an arms industry, along with the banks who play such an important role in financing it, that grew into the most powerful political lobby at work in Washington. This arms industry prospered and became bloated in size as America, in the years after 1968, compensated for its weakness and for its loss of control of oil with massive programs of arms sales or arms aid, with military bases, with wars, and with doctrines about security, the need for the control of oil, the defeat of terror, and so on. With this altered understanding of the last 50 years and of how to think about American political power, let me turn to the third stage, 50 years from today until the year 2068. The next half century will be different again. The case of Syria, I would argue, is already a sign of one of those differences. For the first time, one of the region's most deadly conflicts, in which the US has been a major participant, helping to prolong the civil war, in particular by opposing the initial UN settlement proposals in 2014. That conflict is now being settled by the exclusion of one participant, the US, from the peace process, from the Astana process, one could talk about other changes underway in similar terms. I'll leave some of that for the discussion later on. On a global political level, perhaps the most important change underway already is the rise of China. I don't imagine that when we're celebrating the 30th anniversary, we will sit here without a panelist representing the interests of China in the region. China's power, unlike that of the US, does not depend on building military bases, on selling weapons, on alliance with Salafists or settler movements, or on intensifying and prolonging forms of occupation, war, and civil conflict. In some ways, China is like America in the 1950s, although, of course, vastly more wealthy than America was then. It builds infrastructure projects like the new port at Haifa. It acquires control of oil and other natural sources, as it's doing in Iraq and other countries. And it expands its material strength as a global economic power. However, politics is different today and over the next 50 years for another reason too. And that's because we have a new ability to know what the world will be like in 50 years, something we never had before. The tools of prediction have not been developed by political scientists or by economists, but by climate scientists. This is where the bad news starts. The scientists can tell us with a strong degree of certainty that we have set in motion processes like the melting of the polar ice caps, and that melting will raise the level of the seas around the Earth by 25 meters at least. That process is now irreversible and is going to happen. The melting ice, so we know, more or less for certain, that one day the entire coastline of Palestine, from the plains of Gaza in the south to the fields of Marjan Abba in the north, will be underneath the Mediterranean Sea. The Nile Delta will also disappear. Although inevitable, the rise in sea level will be gradual. To rise by 25 meters may take as long as 10,000 years, but only if we were to take radical steps now to slow it down, slow down the rate at which the ice is melting. If we carry on as we are, that rise of 25 meters will only take 1,000 years. But that's still far in the future. It's more useful, I think, to use the new tools of prediction that climate science has given us to understand what will happen not over 1,000 years, but over the lifetime of many people in this room, let's say by the year 2068. Even just 50 years from now, the future doesn't look good. The coastal plain of Palestine will not yet be underwater. In fact, it may have little water left at all. As you know, this coast forms one end of the great semicircle of fertile land known as the Fertile Crescent. A century ago, archaeologists realized the astonishing role the Fertile Crescent had played in the development of human civilization. It's the region where, of course, 5,000 to 10,000 years ago, farmers first domesticated grains like wheat and barley and learned how to tame and live with animals. This 10,000-year history is now coming to an end. The warming of the Eastern Mediterranean is altering rainfall patterns. Major rivers like the Euphrates in Syria and Iraq may lose up to 75% of the water that flows in them. In some cases, they may even cease to flow. If we continue as we are, just 50 years from now, there will be no more Fertile Crescent. Other parts of the region will experience other changes. It'll get hotter, of course. In the Gulf, this heat will combine with alterations to the monsoon rains over India to produce much higher humidity. Humans can cope with higher temperatures, but higher humidity is lethal. Above a certain level, sweat no longer evaporates from the human body, the human skin, so the body loses the ability to regulate its own internal temperature. At that point, the body starts to overheat and the person dies. Such levels of humidity have seldom been recorded. 50 years from now, if we carry on as we are, the countries of the Gulf may experience them as regular events. Cities like Basra, Dammam, Doha, and Dubai will become uninhabitable. I must apologize for coming to Palestine and talk about long-term problems of the future, when even today, of course, people cannot find water to irrigate the land because of the settlements stealing the supplies of underground water, or count even today on a regular supply of electricity. How can we think about the future when the present is so dire? But climate change is not a question of just 50 years ahead. It's an issue of the present. On the one hand, the effects are here now. The region is currently experiencing a drought due in part to global warming that has seen the lowest levels of rainfall not in the recent past, but in the last 900 years. In Syria and in Yemen, for example, the drought is the direct cause of forms of social stress and collapse that have fed the conflicts in those countries. In Iran, it is similar dire. In Iraq, the activist campaign, Iraq Without Rivers, Iraq Bila Refidain, reports that already today, due to the loss of water in the rivers, 25% of the country's irrigated area no longer supports cultivation. On the other hand, addressing this threat brings other difficulties. At the climate conference in Paris in 2018, the world finally acknowledged the seriousness and agreed to adopt policies to try and limit global warming to 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees centigrade if possible. To do this requires ending the production of petroleum and gas across the world in 50 years, if not sooner. That means within the next 5 years, the global production of oil will start to decline, including in this region. And over the next 2 to 3 decades, in the course of the 2020s and 30s, the world will largely end the use of the internal combustion engine, and the production of oil in most countries, including those of the Gulf, will decline and disappear. That's not an issue that's going to affect the region 50 years from now. It will start to profoundly transform the entire political economy of the Arab world within the coming decade. So climate change already affects the Arab region. In contrast to other regions, it faces a double hit. Its fragile ecosystem is already under great stress, and it is about to lose its largest single source of economic revenue. How has America responded to this situation? It has announced that it does not care. When Washington published the new national security strategy of the Trump administration, it discussed the region in terms of just one simple threat: terrorism. There was a second threat, Iran, but Iran, of course, is seen by Washington as a threat because of terrorism. America does not recognize a problem in the region that cannot be addressed by drone warfare backed by F-16 fighter jets and the snipers protecting the Gaza fence. Washington calls its new policy America First. Moving the embassy to Jerusalem and threatening to end the nuclear agreement with Iran are aspects of this new policy. But an equally dramatic manifestation is the government's denial of the science of climate change and its decision to withdraw America unilaterally from the Paris Climate Agreement. America has always stood outside the international consensus on Palestine. That was somehow seen always as an aberration to be explained by the unusual domestic power of the Zionist lobby in the US. I've never found that explanation adequate. I think it is not an aberration. And I think that today, with Washington weakened and turning inwards, which is what America First means, the United States is now placing itself outside the international consensus on all of the most serious issues of contemporary politics, including, of course, the question of Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mitchell. And I will turn to Dr. Leonid Isaev. His topic is Middle East Challenges and Opportunities.
Yep. Thank you so much. And first of all, I'm thankful to Beirzeit University for the invitation to this conference, and it's a pleasure for me to participate at this conference. Yep, I will try to talk about the Russian policy toward the Middle East, and organizers asked me to speak more about Syria and Russian policy towards Syria. So I will focus in on the Syrian issue, and mostly on the internal dimension of the Russian military campaign in Syria, Russian presence in Syria. And first of all, and it will be my first, and this is my first point. First of all, I would like to say that from my point of view, there is no any long-term Russian strategy in the Middle East. I couldn't identify any real long-term strategy of Russia toward the Middle East and toward Syria. I can identify just some principles, maybe strategic principles of the Russian policy toward the Middle East, and I can identify maybe three most important principles of the Russian policy toward the Middle East. Pragmatism, and this is the most important from my point of view, opportunism, and maintaining dialogue with all actors in Middle East region at the same time. So what does it mean? That means that Russia is not ready for any kinds of ideological cooperation. Russia is not ready for any ideological alliances to be part of any ideological alliances in the region, and any other alliances in the region. If we are talking about the Russian relations with any Arab or Middle Eastern countries, so the main reason for Russia is pragmatic interest. So in this case, we have very neutral position on the most important issues in the Middle East, maybe except Syria. But have a look on the Gulf crisis, for example. Yeah, we have our interests with Qataris, we have our interests in Saudi Arabia, so we have very neutral position on this crisis, and we don't want to be part of this conflict. The Kurdish issue, the same situation. We have our interests in Iraqi Kurdistan. We have very strong economical interests in Iraq. We would like to keep our relations with Turks and Iranians. So from this point of view, we have also very moderate position on the Kurdish issue, and just try to find any Russian announcements on the Kurdish referendum. You just find only one announcement of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, who said that, yep, we understand that Kurds have a right to have its own state, but at the same time we understand that it's necessary to keep Turkey and Iraq and Iran and Syria on its own borders. So yeah, the very neutral position, and we're trying to keep a silence on the most important issues in the region, and we are ready to cooperate with all regional actors to sell our weapons to Iran, at the same time to sell our weapons to the Gulf countries. And just one limitation: our cooperation with any actors in the region shouldn't lead to conflict with another actors in the region. This is the main principles, maybe strategical principles of the Russian policy toward the Middle East. And from this point of view, I guess that we are not really interested in resolving conflicts in the Middle East. And if we are talking about the Russia in the Middle East, so I think we are mostly interested in this chaotic situation in the region, because it's an excellent opportunity for us to use the Middle Eastern agenda for our own interests. And now I would like to speak more about Syria, and I would like to start also from the reasons of the Russian military invasion to Syria, because from my point of view, our invasion to Syria has mostly an internal dimension, and the roots of our military campaign in Syria are mostly internal, not external. So, and I would like to identify just three main reasons of our invasion to Syria. So the first one is political mobilization. This is the very interesting diagram. So the attitude of Russian citizens to the government's policy. I'm so sorry for the Russian explanation. I will try to translate it for you. The blue line shows percent of people who think that everything is going in the right direction. And the red line shows percent of people who think that the country is on the wrong way. And this is a very good example of the wave of patriotic mobilization. For example, by the mid of 2015, the country needed a new wave of patriotic mobilization, which was successfully achieved through successful military operations abroad. As can be seen in the diagram, after the war on South Ossetia in 2008, as well as after the accession of Crimea in 2014, the number of citizens approving the policy pursued by the Russian leadership grows. A similar effect was achieved within a framework of the Syrian campaign, and you can see it on the diagram, after which the number of those who positively assessed the course pursued by the Russian authorities began to increase. But the diagram also shows the waves of patriotic mobilization have a very limited effect, and after which a rollback occurs, and the number of citizens approving the government's policy starts to decline. And you can see it that at the start of 2015, mid-2015, you can identify this rollback of the Ukrainian Crimea wave of patriotic mobilization. So we can observe a similar fall 2015, and that's why it was very important for Russian government to achieve another wave of mobilization around the political regime, especially before the parliamentary elections at 2016. The second route of the Russian invasion in Syria is economical frustration. And we should consider the need to overcome the economic frustration of Russian society in post-Crimea period, as can be seen in diagrams. In 2015-2016 became the peak of the financial and economical crisis that Russia faced after the sanctions policy of the West. So the deficit of the Russian budget in 2015 reached 2.4% of GDP, and the next year it increased to 3.5% of GDP. And here you can see that at the end of 2015 there was a decline in the growth rate of Russian GDP. By autumn 2015, this indicator dropped to the lowest level since 2009, when the country was expressing to consequences of the global financial crisis. So in this case, it was very important for Russian leadership to reorient the people's attention from the internal economical problem to the external problems, to the foreign policy agenda. And in this regard, the terroristic component of the Russian campaign in Syria turned out to be very attractive. And also it was very important for Russian government, because I will show you another diagram. So this Russian military expenditure during the last year. So it was important for us to show that we need to spend a lot of money for the defense issues, and we have our economical problems in our country not due to the failed strategy in Ukraine and our failed strategy with the West, but due to the fighting terrorism in Syria, because we are only country which fighting terrorism in Syria from Russian government's point of view. So yeah, it was very important for us to pay much more attention for the external agenda and for the security issues. And the last reason is a problem of international isolation of Russia, because it was very important for us to show that it's impossible to isolate Russia, and it's necessary to have a dialogue with Russia if you would like to achieve any results in the international agenda. So, and in this case, it's very important to remember Vladimir Putin's speech at the United Nations General Assembly in September 2015, just few weeks before the Russian military invasion to Syria. So the essence of this speech boiled down to the fact that Russia regained the status of the superpower that had been lost after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and whose opinion should be taken into account. In this, it is surprising that such as an assertion found the response among the majority of the Russian population. However, it required the Russian leadership to take specific actions aimed at visualizing these thesis. And on this diagram, it's very clear. This is amount of percent of Russians who think that Russia is a superpower. So it was 64 before the Russian military invasion to Syria, 64%, and now it's at the end of 2016. It was around 72% of Russian population. So, and I can say that we achieved all these goals, but the problem that now we are a hostage of this conflict, and we need to solve another problems on our Syrian agenda. And I can identify two main problems of the of the Russian policy in Syria at the start of 2018. So the first problem is way out problem. I'm sure that Russians trying to find the way out from the Syrian conflict, but there are two dimensions of the problem. The first one is external one, because now we are playing the crucial role on the Syrian negotiation process, and it's impossible to say that, yep, we achieved all our goals. So, and we don't want to participate anymore in Syria crisis. So, yeah, we need to continue the negotiation process. We need to continue the Astana talks. We need to maintain dialogue with Turks and Iranians on Syria, but I'm not sure that we are really interested in that. But we need to do that. And another problem is, and also we have internal dimension of this problem. Yeah, and this is also very interesting diagram. So this is the reason of the Russian military campaign of Syria from Russian population's point of view. So yeah, most of them think that the main reason was the fight against terrorism, against ISIS. But I would like to pay your attention for another answers. Asset protection from the US. This is more than 25%. And assets protection from deposition, so it's around 8-9%. So this is around 40% of Russians who think that we are there to protect our ally, Bashar Assad. So from this point of view, it's impossible for us to stop our military campaign in Syria, because we are only guarantor right now for the Syrian regime. And the last problem, it's, no, let's say, bargaining problem, because Russian policy toward the Syria during the last months is some kind of bargaining policy, bargaining strategy. We achieved some goals in Syria. We achieved some assets in Syria, and we are interested to. And we are interested to sell all our assets in Syria, and the main problem for us that we are ready for any kinds of dialogue with regional actors, and we are interested in and ready for dialogues with the European Union and United States on Syria. But the problem that our real goal is not in Syria. No, look, we participate in Syrian conflict since 2015, October 2015. So what did we do for Syria for this time? We achieved some results for the Syrian regime in short-term perspective, but this is not a solution for the all Syrian people in long-term perspective. We achieved some our internal goals. We tried to use Syrian case in our relations with the West, but till now we didn't achieve anything for Syria, and this is the main problem. That when we are talking with Western countries about Syria, we are talking mostly about our relations with the Western countries, not about Syria. So our main goal is not to achieve any solution for Syria, but achieved any solution for Russian-European relations. Because European Union was and is the main economical partner for us, and this is priority for our external policy. And from this point of view, I guess, and this is my last sentence, I guess that we just trying to use Syrian case in our dialogue with the West, with the Western countries, and especially European Union, because the main priority for us to solve the sanctions problem, and we would like to solve the sanction problem due to the negotiation process in Syria, because right now we couldn't solve it because it's a very strong connection between sanctions and Minsk agreement, and we couldn't realize the Minsk agreement. So from this point of view, it's very important to find another connections with the sanction problem. Libyan case, Syrian case, Yemeni case, I don't know any other cases. So this is the problem of the Russian policy towards Syria, that we are mostly interested in our internal and reasons, and this is the main problem of the Russian dialogue on Syria with regional and especially with international actors. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's turn now to Dr. Dimitri Boris with the EU role in the Middle East in quest for relevance.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you. A very big thanks to Abu Lughod Institute and the Beirzeit University, as well as the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, not only for inviting me here, but also for arranging everything in a very good manner. The program is very good, so congratulations to everyone who has been involved, and also to the people behind the scenes who were taking care of all the logistics. Now, I'm not sure how the order of the presentations was decided and what is the reason of this order, but if it was decided according to relevance, then you guys did a very good job. Similarly to Professor Mitchell, I also have bad news, and I also hate being someone who delivers bad news, but I'm not optimistic when it comes to the European Union's role in the region, and I will elaborate a little bit more on why. But before moving, or before starting talking about the EU's role in the region, first of all, I need to say that I'm not here to represent the EU, quite the opposite. I'm quite critical towards the EU, so don't take my presence as someone who is here to represent the EU, but I'm rather here to offer some insights of how, as an academic and as a researcher, see the EU's role evolving. And before starting talking about specifics, I want to tell you that we need to understand what is happening within the EU in order to understand what the EU does externally, but also more specifically in the region. We have Brexit happening. Yes, it is happening. Whether it's going to be soft or hard, no one knows. but it's the very first time in history where we see disintegration of the EU. Until today, the EU has been integrating, the EU has been expanding, and it is the first time that we see the EU being disintegrated. We have the financial and the economic crisis, and as a Greek, I can tell you a lot about this, but I will not. The fact that it's not in the headlines anymore, it doesn't mean that it's not there. And the whole crisis divided the EU a lot, how to handle the crisis. We have our own Trumps in the EU as well. In general, what can be observed is a rise of right-wing parties among different EU member states. So our American friends are not on their own there. We have more internal problems, especially with Eastern European countries and issues related to rule of law and democracy. See, for example, what is happening with regard to relations between the EU and Poland. We have Orban as well, another internal problem. And we have the so-called refugee crisis, which has further divided the EU and the different EU member states. All these are important aspects which need to be kept in mind before we look at the EU's role externally. Externally, we have the worsening of EU-Russia relations and the annexation of Crimea, which resulted to the EU tightening its sanctions. Now, I do disagree a little bit with the previous speaker. I don't think that sanctions has been any effective at all, but this is another story. We have the Arab uprisings, which happened in the last 7 years. Again, a big division of how to respond to Russia's aggression in Ukraine and Crimea. We have a worsening of EU-Turkey relations, despite the fact that the EU managed to have a deal with Turkey with regard to refugees and the refugee crisis. In general, there is worsening in the relations. And of course, we have Trump, and we're not very sure how to respond to everything that Trump is doing. And of course, we also have Syria, which has been probably one of the biggest failures of EU policies. If you think that this is not enough, I've got more for you. We have Iran, and the EU plays a strategic role in the Iran talks. We have Macron. You see a very nice picture with Trump. And we have Macron and Merkel flying the previous week to the US, try to convince Trump not to withdraw from the Iran deal. We also have Libya, because we shouldn't forget about Libya. It's still at the doorstep of the EU, another very big failure of the EU. And of course, we have the EU, Palestine, and Israel. The EU has traditionally been involved heavily with regard to the conflict. And what is happening at the moment, the EU is trying to put a counterweight on Trump's policies with regard to this conflict. And I think it's quite clear from the very last picture, if you see Mogherini, she's not very happy facing Netanyahu there. So all this is the context, quite a lot to digest, both internally but also externally. There are very important events taking shape, and they are taking shape very quickly as well and very fast. And for all of you who might be familiar with EU policies, the EU is not good at replying fast. The EU always needs a lot of time to reply to events unfolding, and you can see it from the Israel-Palestinian experience, where it took the EU almost 40 years to form a final policy with regard to the conflict. Now, just to give you a little bit of overview, which aspects I think that are important to look at when it comes to the EU's role in the region. There are the policies that have to do with the region as such, or not only with this region, but also with the so-called Eastern neighborhood. and some more recent policies such as the global strategy, which give you the flavor of how the EU is prepared to act in its external relations. First of all, probably the most important policy, the European Neighbourhood Policy, which was developed back in 2003. It was developed originally to respond to the expanding of the EU and the new borders which the EU would be having after the Eastern enlargement of 2004. And you see how the enlargement changed the borders of the EU. Now, the policy was also developed back then because of other events taking place at the international context, such as, for example, the Second Intifada, such as, for example, the 9/11, and the broader securitization of global politics. Also, the euro was introduced in 2002, so it gave the EU a sense of certainty. And we also had the US-led invasion of Iraq. Now, I will not get into too many details on the policy as such or how this policy works, but the policy covers 16 different countries at the EU's so-called neighborhood, both to the south but also to the east. The objectives, and all these are quotes from the policy itself, so again, don't think that this is my take of the policy, but they are just quotes. The idea was to create what the EU called a ring of friends around the EU, which ended up becoming a ring of fire recently. But the idea was, according to the EU, to share the benefits of the enlargement of the EU with the so-called neighbors, to prevent the emergence of new dividing lines between the EU and the new neighbors, and in other words, in very simple words, to offer everything except for EU membership. The policy was based on the idea of differentiated bilateralism, so despite the fact that the policy covered all of these countries, it had a very strong bilateral element where countries could enhance their relations with the EU, and the more they wanted to enhance their relations, the more the EU was willing to give to them.